appropriate song, Elliot. Lance asked me this morning what was the thought for tonight, and it is simply this: be faithful. I can't think about our special sister, Miss Margaret, without thinking about just a life dedicated to faithfulness in many ways. Early on in her life, she made choices of faithfulness. Many of us know about a lot of those choices, especially with her family and in reference to her own future. And many times those lessons were made very selflessly in her life of what she thought was best for her children. And when you live a life of quiet faithfulness, and I don't mean to, and I'm going to talk about some things now if you mishear me, because we're going to start in looking at Luke chapter 12, verses 37 through 44. And as I said tonight, as much as it lies within me, I'm going to be brief tonight, because we do want to make it in an appropriate way over to with the family. And while you're turning, there was some concern about directions. Whitley's is the one, if you go down, get my directions here right. Light turn left, cross 29, it's on the left. So it's right there on what's known as Highway 3, as it kind of goes on through up into Kannapolis. So if you need further directions, if you'll see me after services, I'll help you with that. But Luke 12, verse 37, here's Jesus, and he's talking about several things in this text. And as he's kind of getting toward the end of his thoughts, Peter asks him a question to explain it, and he does. I'm going to read this text and make a few observations. Blessed are those servants whom the master, when he comes, will find watching. Surely I say to you that he will gird himself and have them sit down to eat, and will come and serve them. And if you should come in the second watch, or come in the third watch, or find them so, blessed are those servants. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. And Peter's question there is, Lord, do you speak this parable only to us, or to all the people? The Lord said, who then is that faithful and wise steward, whom his master will make ruler over his household, to give them their portion of food in due season? Blessed is the servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will make him ruler over all that he has. The key thought there, and it's also echoed over in Luke 16. I'm staying in Luke here for just a minute. Turn to Luke 16 and verse 10. Faithful in little. And when you first hear that, you're going, but what do you mean by that? I really believe there's a principle that God talks about, that Jesus really emphasizes, that when God comes, he just wants to find us doing what he's asked us to do. Is that so hard? That God's request to us is just do what I've asked you to do. And the key thought there is to be faithful. And that way, if we're faithful in what we're doing, if it's in little or if it's in a lot, but he emphasizes in Luke 16 something I find interesting. He who is faithful in which is least is faithful also in much. He who is unjust in what is least is also unjust in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to you the true riches? And if you've not been faithful in what is another man's, who will give you what is your own? And of course, he's referencing here stewardship, but it's that thought process. If I'm faithful in what I have to do, and I go back and think of the parable of the 5, 2, and 1 talent individual, we're not going to look at that text. But the struggle with the 1 talent man wasn't the fact that he just had 1 talent, it's the fact that he didn't do anything with it. It wasn't that he was less than the 2 talent or the 5 talent individual. And there's so many things, and I'm not going to get ahead of myself about it for tomorrow, for Margaret's memorial, but there's one particular ministry that she did that all of us, I dare say, is there anyone in the audience that has not received a card from Margot? I don't want to raise hands and put everybody on the spot, but I dare say, if you had a birthday, an anniversary of some other event, I know through Caleb's journey, constantly, we were receiving notes. And it was just her. And she'd come to me at the beginning of each month, and it used to, especially if I was late with the calendar, Brett's helped me with that now, so the calendar's more on time. But if I were late and getting the calendar, and she'd come to, whose birthday's this week? Whose anniversary's coming up? because she was like clockwork and trying to make sure and communicate in a way and touch people's lives. When you're faithful in what you're able to do, it is a powerful thing. I found this quote that to me kind of epitomizes not just her spirit, but the spirit of many that I know. I found that if you want to be used by God, then you have to be willing to do the little things first. Because we can never be too small for God, only too big. I hope you get what that's saying. I think sometimes we want to be the individual that God notices, and we want to do something really significant when He's saying there's a lot of stuff for you to be doing if you just open your eyes. There are a lot of necessary things that have to be accomplished. Faithfulness to your family. Faithfulness to your children. Faithfulness to those that you care about and that you love. And there were several individuals that I thought about with this and the words that were used with them. If you look over at the end of Paul's letters, he mentions 3 individuals, and it's all we know about them: Epaphras, Tychicus, and Silvanus. And all he says about them is that they were faithful men. What does that mean? They did what God asked them to do. They did what Paul had instructed them to do by the Spirit. Sometimes we overlook the simple things in life and their importance and their significance. And simply doing, as Wayne Miller coined the phrase early on in his ministry, he said it wasn't originally him, but it is always thinking him when I think of, you do what you can with what you have where you are. God doesn't ask any more than that. But He does hold us accountable if we don't do what we can with what we have where we are. That's the other text over in Luke 12, and he says there's going to be a day when we stand before God, and we're going to be held accountable for what we did not do that we should have, if it's something within that realm. Onesiphorus is mentioned, and he's simply referred to as a faithful servant. And we know what the letter that Philemon sends back and recognizes the fact that what Onesimus has done something that no one else is willing to do, and that's come to see Paul and risk his own life for Paul's benefit. We read about Antipas as a faithful martyr. You go, ooh, I don't know if I wanted that as an acknowledgement. That means here's an individual that not just went through the motion, he gave his life for the cause of Christ, was willing to give up his life as Stephen and others did in the first century and following. So and my question to you tonight as we kind of think about this faithful and little is, am I willing to do what God wants me to do? Colossians chapter 3 verse 23 says, whatever you do in word or deed, do all to the glory of God. In my world, the things that I have the opportunity to do, am I doing those for God in a way that brings Him glory? Then you ultimately get over to Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10, which is the text that we always go to when we're talking about someone at the end of their life. And the text there in Revelation 2, as shared by John, do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. But if you'll notice earlier in that, in verse 9, he says something about them that gives credence to what they've done, that created and showed their faithfulness. I know your works. I know your tribulation. I know your poverty, but you're rich. I know the blasphemy of those who are there, the Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. And he says, I know about you. So one of the comforts we can have at any moment in our life is God knows what we're doing. It's not about what anybody else knows about us. Or that can be a source of concern for us, because God knows if we're doing what He wants us to do, or if we're doing what He doesn't want us to do. But the great comfort in being faithful is that God's requirement of me is to be faithful with what I know, and faithful in a way that really shows my dedication to Him. Flip back over for just a moment to Luke 16. And it's in that text when he makes the observation that he does early on. It's the story of the rich man that had a steward in the opening part of chapter 16. There was a certain rich man who had a steward, and an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. So he called him and said to him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be a steward." Then the steward said within himself, "What shall I do? For my master has taken the stewardship away from me. I cannot dig, and I'm ashamed to beg." I mean, here's a person who realizes, I've been caught not doing what I'm supposed to do. What are my options? I find it interesting that God shares this scenario. Here's an individual that has blown it. Word got back. The master has given him responsibility. He has failed. Interesting. I resolve what to do. That when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of his master's debtors and said, "How much do you owe my master?" He said, 100 measures. He said, "Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. How'd you like a 50% reduction in your bill? He said to another, "How much do you owe?" So he said, 100 measures a week. "Take your bill and write 80. Here's a 20% reduction. So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourself by unrighteous manner. When you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home." He was faithful in what is least. Now, if you, from a human perspective, read that and go, wait a minute. Here's an individual that wasn't doing what he should be with what he was given. Until it became very obvious to him, I'm fixing to be out of home. I'm going to be nice to the other folks so that I'll have somewhere to live. And in a weird way, he's commended, because in doing that, he at least does something. God's desire for us, bottom line, is to be faithful. If it's out of an initial love and a trust for God, sometimes it's out of fear. Because we want to be found. I love the song. Each day I'll do a golden deed. And a picture of a person in my head that we all love and adore. That's what God wants from us. In our moment, in our time, I want to make a difference in one other person's life. I want to do something that God wants me to do for them. This week, in memory and in honor of Margot, maybe we can find someone that we haven't done something for and that we need to do that little something. It's not always the huge things. Sometimes it's just taking that moment to say or be what someone needs. Be faithful till you die. I will give you a crown of life. I really appreciated what Frank read, the text this morning, when he said, "Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of one of his saints." It's hard. But faithfulness will be rewarded, even in that which is least, as long as we're doing what we can where we are. Tonight, a song has been announced, I think. Has it been announced, Elliot? Song of invitation, okay. As we sing this song, you'll have an opportunity. It hadn't been announced. What is the song of invitation? 552. 552. And as we sing this song, maybe there's something that you are willing to say, I need to be more faithful in this. Maybe something just individually where you're at. It may be that you need to express your faith for the first time. That is the ultimate moment of faith when I'm penitent, I confess Jesus as Lord, and I enter into a relationship with Him through baptism. Any way we can help you in that journey tonight, would you come as we stand and as we sing?